Okay, welcome back then. It is late January 1868 and time for the winter quarterly report. It's been a good kind of quarter, financially, again, really good kind of sort of fiscal quarter. Exports continue to kind of climb as a proportion of our overall private turnover, which is really, really good. And we kind of, I mean, it's fairly sustained as well. We're kind of edging towards making pretty much as much money. Our capitalists anyway make as much money from exports as they do from domestic market sales, and that's sustained, as I say before. It's kind of happened in fits and bursts, but the really interesting thing is in some areas now we have established ourselves. So, for example, I think I mentioned this in the last video. Dyes were really good, and we tended to kind of switch place between Britain and ourselves being the leading kind of power. We have invested a bit more into dye production, and we're now kind of edged ahead. We are the leading kind of dye exporter in the world. You never would have imagined in 1850 that the Ottoman Empire would have led anything in terms of exports, but we are the principal dye exporter in the world. In terms of tobacco, we still sit at kind of fourth. Although the other areas are basically Chesapeake, which is the entire north, is the United States, and then you got South Brazil, East Mexico. These are sort of really big tobacco producing regions also, and those trade boxes tend to comprise lots of states, not just one. So we're not just talking about Mexico and Brazil. We're talking about the kind of really Central America part of Mexico, Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, these places. And the Brazil trade box, I think, probably includes Venezuela, Colombia, these kinds of places. So it's pretty good that we're kind of fourth place. Manufactured goods, we're the fourth biggest exporter. Textiles, we've slipped to second place behind Parana, but Parana again is pretty much most of South America. It's like Brazil and again all the countries mentioned previously. So really, really good kind of we've established ourselves as a kind of credible industrial power, and it's kind of heartening to see. And it's given me a bit of a thought about the game. I won't do it yet, but one thing I was thinking about is that I quite naturally now start looking at what raw materials are available in different areas. And this is a natural offshoot from the nature of the game. We've kind of departed enough now from the historical script that we're starting to look at areas where we can get kind of strategic resources or really, really high yield kind of access to raw materials, which is really the kind of, it's the dynamo really, or it's the kind of the thing that propelled imperialism during this period. It's the reason why powers would kind of seize new territories and regions. It would not have really made any sense for the Ottoman Empire to do any of this stuff in the 1850s, because most of the kind of raw materials inside the Ottoman Empire were not even exploited. We had such a small economy. Any area that we would have taken, it would have been a case of we'd have to hold it down at great expense with very limited means. It would have been completely, the only reason we would have done it is for prestige reasons, which is kind of why in most games you do these things. But now, in certain kinds of areas like coal, for example, all of the coal in the Ottoman Empire is being exploited. The coal mines have been upgraded. They're yielding the most they can in terms of current technology anyway. So we do have a bit of an eye on kind of other areas. Now, of course, the game was set at the beginning in 1850 to pretty much limit kind of territorial conquest to the areas where the ruling class of that sort of power at that time, where they had kind of interests, and in case of the Ottoman Empire, it's really just sort of they were looking for survival. They're looking to preserve their position. They weren't really looking to expand at all. But in terms of spheres of influence, they viewed the kind of Arabian Peninsula really as their kind of area for natural expansion. We have, for the most part now, or we will within say 10 years, we will have colonized, I'm quite sure, all of the Arabian Peninsula. Aden now has the level of colonial penetration necessary to be brought into the fold, and Hejaz, we're gradually, inexorably working towards the level of colonial penetration we would need to bring them to formal colonial status. And we're already making some ahistorical moves. Now, in terms of Kuwait and the Gulf states, the Ottomans did try and colonize these regions. They just were unsuccessful. But nevertheless, this was an area of historical interest. But one area which was not really of historical interest is Zanzibar, which we've turned into a protectorate. On that basis, I won't do it now. I might do it on the succession of the next monarch, which is a good 10 years away. Alter the options, because we've departed from the script, to allow for us to prosecute offensive conflicts for a number of reasons. One, we are a much more powerful Ottoman Empire than that which existed in the 1860s. We've had a really, really good start to the kind of campaign. I don't want us to be in a position again where we're fighting a war against Austria and we're trying to force them to make territories independent, which they're reticent to do. And even if we manage to achieve that, it ends up being a single-tile state like Croatia. Incidentally, Croatia has pretty much put all of the legwork into becoming a protectorate of ours. They've kind of organised state visits, all kinds of things to improve their relations. So they definitely view us as their kind of overlord, you know. But in the next war with Austria, if it's in the next 10 years, I think the option should be, should credibly exist for us to, for example, seize Bucharest or Montenegro as a territory of the Ottoman Empire. Now, one of the reasons why that wouldn't have been a credible thing to do in the 1850s is other powers wouldn't have accepted that. The other great powers would not have been prepared to countenance the Ottomans reacquiring territory. And there's some historical precedents for that, even right up to like the Balkan Wars, 1912. When the Balkan Wars kicked off, the kind of great European powers stepped in and said that they would not be prepared to accept any kind of, any change to the territorial status quo. The reason they said that is that in 1912, at the beginning of the Balkan Wars, the European powers thought the Ottomans were going to win, and fairly understandably. They had, nearly twice the population of all of the minor Balkan states that were ranged against them. In the event, they lost really embarrassingly, and this led to the creation of a much larger Bulgaria, a much larger Greece, and a much larger kind of Serbia. Yeah, and of course, what the European powers, who they were talking to as the Ottomans, they didn't mind the small powers acquiring territories. They did not want the Ottomans reasserting themselves. The only reason they would provide that guarantee also is because they didn't feel that the Ottomans were a threat. They didn't feel that the Ottomans would be able to stand up for themselves. In the case of Greece, for example, in the 1820s, 1830s, when Greece became independent, the British didn't have to project much strength to make it happen. It wouldn't be the case with an authentic great power that could hold its own, that could defend itself. It would be much less the case. If France was going to try and make a move against a minor power, Britain would have to take into calculation whether or not they would be prepared to have a war with a great power in Europe in the defense of that territory, and often that wouldn't be the case. So to that end, I think it's credible, it's historically credible that we would be able to make some moves to resolve, for example, the Greek question. That in the event of a large war, we would be able to press territorial claims. And one of the reasons why we should be able to do that, I think, also, is because we naturally look at areas. We're naturally looking at places like what raw materials exist where, how much could that benefit our economy. We're looking at coal, for example, in Romania. This would be really, really good for us. And again, we wouldn't be doing that in the 1850s. There'd be no natural basis in the 1850s. We've taken Vienna twice. We gave the Austrians an absolute drubbing in the last war. We've established ourselves as a great power. We've got a seat back at the table. Austria is the kind of sick man of Europe. So to that end, I think it's something that we'll do. We won't do it right away. Someone also mentioned that we could look at this as a way of resolving the kind of Egyptian question. We wouldn't be able to do it in one fell swoop because we would have claims only on adjacent territories. So we'd have to kind of sort of carve up sort of Egypt salami style in a number of campaigns. It wouldn't, I don't think, be militarily difficult, famous last words, but it is something that we could kind of look at doing. And again, a really powerful resurgent Ottoman Empire, I think it's credible that they'd be able to do that. That could still bring us into conflict. Bear in mind that if we do this, if we do change the options, it also makes other great powers much more aggressive. Now, the two neighboring great powers that we have already have claims on our territory anyway. But other kind of powers, so for example, if we colonized Tunisia, or whether France did, we would have a claim against French-held territory, they would have a claim against us. It means they would have a permanent casus belli. They would always have the legal basis to go to war with us. So we have to keep that in mind. I mean, Britain might even also with regard to kind of Corfu. Casus belli doesn't guarantee that a great power will go to war with you. It just means that if you're at a vulnerable moment and you're really weak, in a war with, say, Austria and Russia simultaneously, you suffer a defeat. It results in your military kind of power momentarily being kind of significantly reduced. That great power might exploit that opportunity. So you can it's very easy to play this game and think, oh, wow, I'm doing really good and this kind of thing. But it's very quickly, you can become overwhelmed and get yourself in a difficult situation. So we need to think really carefully about it. The ramifications that we would have, it will lead to more ahistorical wars among other powers also, although there have been a number of those anyway. But it's something that I think we could probably do maybe with the kind of succession. I mean, it's 10 years from now, Abdulaziz, there'll be a coup against him. Spoiler alert. But, Abdulaziz, he didn't really wage any kind of winner. He was quite a peaceful sort of monarch, really. He maintained the territorial integrity of the empire, to his credit, during his reign. But, for example, with the succession of Abdul Hamid, who would succeed a monarch that actually follows Abdulaziz. Abdulaziz is succeeded by a monarch that lasts only a couple of months. And then Abdul Hamid comes to power, and he's in power for 30 years. He is a much more conservative, sort of Bismarckian kind of figure. You can imagine that if he had the means at his disposal, that he would be much more bellicose in the international stage. So we could use that maybe as an opportunity to switch the rules. That gives us some more options late game in terms of what we can do. The other thing I'm worried about also is that during the reign of Abdul Hamid, which lasts for 30 years, the Ottomans had a couple of big historical events. They lost the war against Russia in 1877, based on our experience of the Crimean War, where we were losing that war, but that war ended in our favour ultimately, even though we were really getting cornered. Who's to say that won't happen with the 1877 war, which resulted, incidentally, in the Peace of San Stefano, the creation of a Bulgarian principality, which is really northern Bulgaria here, and this sort of thing. In some cases, we do have claims on territories, but not, where we could reclaim them, but not all of them. So, for example, Petric, we don't have a claim on Petric, on Niche, which is rather strange. And the fact that the base game doesn't have these claims might exist to facilitate certain kinds of scripted events and stopping the Ottoman AI from kind of rolling those events back. I want the option, if we're able to defend ourselves against Russia comfortably and we have a scripted event, we can say, okay, the great powers intervene to force our hand. We have to secede northern Bulgaria, but we would be in a position to readdress the balance at a later date. It means that we can always look at these European territories as a sure thing. We can always reassert ourselves here if scripted events force us. Keeping in mind that by 1914, the Ottomans in Europe are really reduced to kind of this area here, which I don't think I'm going to be prepared to accept, especially if we've industrialized, we've poured a lot of investment into the Balkan Peninsula, and we've fought really, really successful wars to defend our territories in the Balkan Peninsula. It would be unfair and unhistorical for the kind of scripted events to rob us of these regions. So it's a consideration that we'll look to. If we go to war with Austria in the next 10 years and we have a similar experience, we might kind of reserve the option, just in this case, to switch the options momentarily to allow us to press claims against Austria, then switch them back and see how that goes. And then we maybe look at a complete change come sort of the late 1870s with the succession of a new monarch, which allows us to prosecute offensive wars, which is in keeping with our historical trajectory, I would argue, since 1850. So that's a kind of natural branch off from the economy, really, because the economy is resource hungry. We have just researched a new technology. I can't remember what it's called. We've got so many now. I mean, these aren't all technologies. Some of them are just the osmosis of ideas that don't necessarily benefit us, anarchism, trade unionism, these kind of things. They inevitably, we become familiar with these things in time, but they're not really technologies that we research. I can't remember what, ore extraction and processing. So is this technique or engineering based? Not only did dynamite enhance access to mineral ores, it also greatly sped up the processing of the ores obtained from mining and increasing the efficiency. Okay, so it's basically the systematic use of explosives in ore extraction and processing. Now, that doesn't allow us to do much with coal mining because coal mining is already mechanized, but iron mines we can now upgrade. Every single iron mine. Iron we're doing pretty. I mean, iron we basically meet domestic demand and have a little bit left over for export, and we do have excess iron capacity. There are areas in the Ottoman Empire with natural access to iron that we can exploit, but that's kind of moot now anyway because we can upgrade the mines that we currently have to significantly increase the yield. But the other thing that we have, of course, is diamonds. We can now upgrade all of our diamond mines using explosives, systematic use of explosives, which combined with railroad access, which dramatically improves the efficiency and the sheer bulk, the amount that we can move out of these mines. That's a game changer. That's going to be a really, really significant. It's going to be like a kind of shot to the arm for the economy, really, and also for kind of state revenue. So that's a really exciting development, and we'll be looking to kind of exploit that over the next year. The main area for investment so far in the last quarter, much like the quarter before, has been the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, that is to say Aden. And that is because this area, of course, is really resource rich with, overwhelmingly, it's either access to opium or coffee, all of which are high yield commodities. Opium, to just give an example, we consume 10 units of opium per term on our domestic market. We basically meet demand at the moment, okay? If we take Zanzibar, which is quite populous, okay, Zanzibar has 2 opium plantations, each generating 1 unit of opium per turn. With railroads, that's 4 units, that's 8. If these are upgraded, that could be 10 to 15 units per field, per plantation, per term. And domestic demand is like 10 units. And that's in Zanzibar alone. In addition to Zanzibar, we've got an opium plantation being built in Mogadishu. We've got an opium plantation being built in Mukalla, an opium plantation being built in Hadramaut, an opium plantation being built in Hodeidah. Plus, we've got the existing opium plantation in Bursa. So that's really, really exciting. To be clear, actually, I just realized we can't upgrade opium plantations with explosives, but that's something that will be on the cards in the future. But with railroad access, we're going to be looking at 8 units out of Zanzibar alone, plus the 6 that we get from Bursa. In fact, if it's 6 in Bursa, that might mean it's 12 units from Zanzibar, plus all the other opium plantations. So yeah, opium obviously isn't something that's mined, so we don't get any benefit from kind of explosives. But nevertheless, that is a really exciting development. Opium and coffee would be in a position to export both of those things. So yeah, really good round economically. There's been some interesting kind of developments on the international stage. So peace has broken out between Italy and Austria, although you wouldn't know it by looking at the map, and I don't know why this is. So it's clear that Rome and Naples are Italian, because the cities are Italian, but the regions have some kind of broken control. I don't know why that is. That might just be because there are kind of Austrian loyalist partisans from maybe the papacy or the Two Sicilies or something like this that exercise some measure of control in this region temporarily. But anyway, Italy is an established fact. I can't imagine the peace was favourable to Italy. It's likely Italy's going to be doling out reparations to Austria or something like this. But it is established now as a fully contiguous kind of state by the looks of it, that runs from kind of, Syracuse in the south to kind of Milan in the north. And these two territories are Italian, albeit with limited. Keep in mind that when peace is declared, all of the territories, whether you have troops in them or not, irrespective of the number of troops, those territories do automatically go right over to the control, return. So when we declared peace with Austria, we didn't have any kind of regional control over Vienna, even though we had 100,000 men. We had to basically just march those men back. So I don't know, I can't fathom. And the Austrians don't control these cities. So this was not a part of the peace deal. So I don't know why that is. That might become clearer with time. We're having a look at Rome now at 66 military control. For Austria, it might be the case that would just gradually atrophy for some reason, and it comes under Italian control. But interesting development there. The other kind of significant kind of development on the international stage then is the Meiji Restoration. It did not come via a scripted event, but rather I was looking at great powers, major organized powers. Noticed that Japan was listed as an organized power. I thought, well, maybe it always was. Clicked on it, and lo and behold, yeah, you can see the sort of you've got Meiji, you've got a prime minister, and this sort of thing, and they're kind of undergoing a similar process to what we've undergone really during the Tanzimat, albeit probably a more profound one, because Japan is a much more backward, parochial, feudal sort of society, whereas at the beginning of the Tanzimat with the Ottomans, we were already in some respects quite a modern and developed society in comparison to Japan. So it's going to be a really profound transformation to Japan. And there were a few things that I noticed they were doing on the international stage that suggested they had undergone a transition. They had a brief crisis with Russia over control of the Kurils, or the Kuriles, or whatever they're called in the north. It's a crisis that they didn't come out on top of. But it was a diplomatic crisis, a diplomatic standoff. I'm sure that's probably going to be the beginning of a few salvos on the international stage, as Japan, the kind of birth pangs of Japan, entering into kind of the world of the great powers. And I mentioned also in the last video anyway, the Chinese Civil War, as that happens, is kind of over, which creates a bit more kind of stability in the sort of Pacific. We'll keep an eye on that. Interesting kind of situation. Doesn't affect us too much. But again, it's a long-term project for us. I mean, Japan is interesting because, in a sense, the kind of campaign with the Ottoman Empire since 1850, we kind of used late 19th century Japan as a bit of a model, really. Lots of funding on research and development, a real kind of eagerness to sort of embrace transformation. The key thing was to field a modern, large, credible army so that we could defend ourselves and defend our interests. We've done that, and our army's kind of been proven. The Navy is going to be on the cards, I think, in the next decade, very much so. But we've used Japan as a kind of blueprint, really, for how we could bring the Ottoman Empire. Isn't that interesting? Like Google Maps, you see that one tile is slightly blurred. Why is that? Yeah, I'm sure it'll sort itself out. But yeah, so Japan has been a bit of an inspiration. It's really bothering me now. I can't not look at it. It wasn't like that before, so it's obviously just a kind of processing issue. We'll see what happens when I finish the video. I'm past 10 or something. And yeah, I think we've done really well. I mean, like, Christ, we've got railways now running from Sarajevo all the way down the kind of Levant. There's a branch off route that goes into kind of Mesopotamia, links up Basra, links up the diamond mine in Kuwait, and we've got railroad development now in Qatar. We tend to link this area up. We do intend to link this area up with railroads, really with a view on the kind of diamond mines. But we've got railroad construction all the way through the Hejaz. The line is currently completed as far north as Sana. You can now travel from Sana to Sarajevo in the Ottoman Empire on railroads, and we've got lines going in 45 days. Construction will complete in Taiz, and then in 135 days construction will be complete, and that will link up really the heart of the Ottoman Empire with the kind of southern Arabian coastline, and that'd be an exciting development and will allow us to much more easily project strength in the Indian Ocean. In terms of colonies and spheres of influence, I'm going to keep that as that is. The reason being is it kind of is designed a little bit to kind of railroad the AI into colonizing areas where they really did have an interest. It makes sense that that's the case, I think. And a lot of these European powers had interests beyond the areas they colonized that were not fulfilled. So there's already plenty of kind of margin and overlap for kind of, like margin for overlap for sort of prospective colonial kind of conflicts, And once areas are colonized, even with spheres of influence set to historically, we can still press a claim on an area if we defeat a great power. So if, for example, Italy colonized Tunisia, we defeated Italy in a war, but we never even occupied Tunisia, we could still press a claim, I believe, to have Tunisia transferred into kind of Ottoman suzerainty. So that's worth bearing in mind. It just makes it harder for us to colonize areas. So if we go to our colonial map, Ministry of Colonial Affairs, of all the ministries, it takes the longest to load up. Yeah, so if we look at the kind of negative areas, there's certain areas that we get a little bit of a disadvantage in terms of achieving colonial penetration. And that just reflects the fact that, it was harder, it would have been harder for that power to colonize certain regions because they had no real interest there. And the kind of the negativity hit that you get reflects really how far removed it is. I think that's realistic. That also manages European powers. They have the same kind of things. They have positive areas where they get a prestige bonus. It's easier for them. Like, for example, when they play a colonial penetration card, it's much easier for them to acquire penetration in these regions because there's precedence for it. They already have a measure of soft power in the region, this kind of thing. But areas that are kind of set to negative, it is harder for us to achieve colonial penetration, much harder. And in some areas, it's so remote that it's never going to happen. The Ottoman Empire, was just never going to colonize Nigeria during this period, even if it kind of fared much better than it did in real life. I think that's realistic, irrespective of how we do actually. Actually, that doesn't mean that we couldn't claim Nigeria in a war, by the way. It just means that trying to colonize the region would be a kind of a complete epic and futility. Now, you will recall from the last quarterly report that we attempted to make a landing at Massawa. We knew that Massawa was controlled by brigands, by rebels, that couldn't be negotiated with. They had no state apparatus of any kind. I didn't realize there were any actual forces there. I had imagined that they probably occupied the region, and then the forces would have likely located Massawa and maybe were involved in activities in kind of central Somalia. That turned out to be wrong, and there were reasonably substantial rebel forces holding out in Massawa. Now, the force that we landed in Massawa was an irregular force. It was a militia force that we built during the Austrian War, and it was constructed really just to hold territory down. It's a few thousand men. These are rear echelon forces, reservists, if you like, or it's just paramilitary forces. And we landed this force in Massawa, not really anticipating any kind of resistance. Once we realized we had to assault Massawa itself, it's not a fortress, but that we'd have to assault the town. Before we did that, we supplemented the irregulars with a cavalry brigade, a light cavalry brigade, which we took out of the arsenal at Adrianople, and then we conducted an assault. We had a bit of a Rorke's Drift moment, I should say. Of a force of about 11,000, we suffered about 4,000 casualties in a failed assault on Massawa. It's nearly half the force that we deployed is wiped out. And here's the onion: the force that was actually there, the rebel force, even though it's comprised of a number of units, most of them under strength, irregular kinds of formations, that rebel force only comprised about 2,000-3,000 men. So they inflict 4,000 casualties on us, and it's quite likely that they're quite sort of seasoned quite seasoned kind of brigands, probably having been involved in kind of continuous running warfare in Central Africa. They're probably quite experienced, and we commit, irregular forces that have no real combat experience. We decided not to kind of press the issue. We re-embarked those forces in the Red Sea, and ultimately we moved the irregulars back round, and we're in the process of moving them around to garrison Kuwait. In Kuwait, it's completely counterintuitive that we did this. We actually had a regular professional Marine brigade. So we thought, okay, let's switch the irregulars out, the rear echelon guys. They can hold Kuwait, which is already a formal colony, which means it has a very low risk of revolt. All we really need to do is to have a force that dampens any kind of possibility of revolt, and get the professional force, the Marines, embark those. And those boys are 3 days away from landing at Aden. This is the kind of force that we want that will do the job, I think. We're going to combine this force also with the light cavalry. The light cavalry brigade will be good still, I think. We can land the Marines at Massawa with the light cavalry, conduct an assault on the town at Massawa. Then the light cavalry brigade can sortie south in towards Assab and hold the area of kind of southern Eritrea. So having the light cavalry is good. It gives us a bit of a reconnaissance bonus. Also, it gives us some good intelligence in terms of what brigand or rebel forces are in kind of South Sudan. But the Marine Brigade, I think, will kind of do the job in a way that, it's irregulars are going to really struggle, obviously, dealing with kind of hardened sort of brigands. So landing a professional military force there will absolutely do the job. It's an experienced force. It's been involved in running insurgencies in Iraq over many, many years. I have a lot of experienced officers. One thing we are going to do also is we've enjoyed another number of technological research kind of branches being closed. One of them we weren't directly funding, actually, but it was something that was gradually developing, explosive shells. But the other was military staff system. I don't know if it's related to that, but in the immediate aftermath of achieving military staff system, we have the appearance of a number of new generals. Now, in the last year, 2 or 3 lieutenant generals retired. They weren't significant ones. I think it was Izet Pasha and Hussein Pasha, not to be mistaken with Hussein Avni, the 3-star. They were fairly kind of generic, unremarkable 2-star generals. And in their place, we have 3 2-stars that become spawned. So one is Ahmed Ayub Pasha. Now, he looks to be a pretty capable figure. He is a tactician of Elan, an admired commander, and a strong disciplinarian. Doesn't start with remarkable starting stats, but this is definitely the recipe for a really shining career if he lives long enough and if he has the opportunity to kind of, show his skills. I think he'll be given ultimately command of probably an Imperial Guard Corps in one of the better armies that we have. In the short term, however, we've instantly decided to dispatch him to Aden to take control of the Marine force that we're going to land in Massawa, because we want this guy to get a lot of combat experience and to use his skills to benefit, our interests, our strategic interests. So having this Marine force, which has already got a pretty good raw combat value anyway, even though it's only a brigade, it does have access to light artillery battery. This is the old bronze artillery. Incidentally, we've also achieved iron muzzle-loaded artillery. So these units will be gradually upgraded into iron muzzle-loaders. These are still bronze, sort of traditional Napoleonic guns. But he'll be given command of the 3rd Marine Brigade and will really put some iron in the glove for that force that's going to be making a landing at Massawa. We have 2 other commanders, both of them 2-stars, of course. In addition to Ahmed Ayub, we have Ahmed Asat Pasha. He looks like it's a boilerplate generic kind of commander. What I quite like is the generic portrait changes with different time periods, which is quite interesting. So we've got a slightly more modern kind of portrait there, which I really, really like. He's got good strategic stats to begin with. In addition to him, I've got another generic boilerplate, Mehmed Izet, not to be confused with a previous Mehmed Izet, actually, with the same name. These are different generals. This is not, we have seen there's a bit of a bug where the same general spawns, but these are different. They have different stats. It's a different portrait. Just 2 men of the same name, actually. Anyway, I think the last one might be Ahmed Izet. No, we did have a Mehmed Izet. But anyway, yeah, so that's quite good. So we've got 3 new commanders, and that's pretty promising. And that's to replace 2 2-stars that retired. So we're kind of one up in terms of commanders. And it may be the case, if that is related to military staff system, It may result in further spawning of commanders. I'm not too sure. That remains to be seen, but that'd be a welcome development if it were the case. What we are going to start doing is taking an increasingly professional approach to how we organize our armies. So we've had a kind of, we've not really bothered naming things. I mean, I've been naming garrisons and stuff like that. What we'll start doing in the next kind of couple of years is actually naming our armies, first army, second army, and so on. So we're not going to have armies that are named in a traditional fashion after regions, like I don't know, the Army of the Potomac or North Virginia. To cite a couple of examples in the American Civil War. But or in this case, we tend to have armies simply named after the commander. There's nothing really wrong with that, but I think as we begin to enter into, as warfare begins to become a more scientific business, a much more serious and calculated business, the way that we name our units and the way we organize ourselves should reflect that a little bit. I think it'd be good for a bit of a immersion, but it's also fairly realistic that during this period we should not start naming our armies and giving them areas of responsibility. So we'll start doing that in the next kind of couple of years. The only other real kind of development I can think of in terms of the economy is that we've, for the first time since the early 1850s, adjusted some of our tax sliders. Now, we are generating a huge amount of private capital. Every fortnight now, we're generating usually about 1,000 million, I guess, if it's the units of that private capital. It's a huge amount, and we've begun to cool off on research and development. The reason being is we just didn't have enough state revenue to maintain 4 lines. So what we are going to be doing is we're going to begin researching Navy now. We're going to keep a line open for artillery forces. The reason being is that we are behind with regard to artillery forces development. The next line, which has been opened up, is iron breech loaders. That will move on then into steel breech loaders, which historically would begin around 1870 anyway. So once we begin researching steel breech loaders, we're kind of historically in the area where we should be. So we're a little bit behind. Our army is, for the entire period of this game so far, has been armed with just traditional Napoleonic brass, brass sort of muzzle loaders. If we can, I'm not sure if we can see a difference between any of our artillery. So here we go. 10th Artillery Regiment has upgraded guns. So these are iron breech loaders. And this is compared to the more traditional Napoleonic brass guns or that we had before, So we kind of, these do upgrade kind of like regular regular infantry forces do, which you can see. That doesn't happen with the Navy. So with the Navy, what we have to be kind of mindful of is when we do begin research, I want to make sure that we've got the resources necessary. We're going to need a little bit of state money in the short term. First of all, because we have the colonial penetration necessary to bring the Aden or the Yemen over into formal status. We need 375 for that, plus a diplomat to grease the wheels for that. Then we're going to be looking at the Hejaz. The Hejaz is going to require constant state investment as opposed to private investment to bring it into the colonial penetration threshold necessary for formal colonial status. So to that end, we do need, constant access to kind of state revenue, more so than we have had. Once we upgrade the diamond mines, that will increase conversion substantially. We have to be careful of that though, because that could incur inflation. So we'll keep a careful eye on the economy once that happens. That will allow us to open up 2 lines in the Navy. And what I want to do is when we open up a line, we want to make sure it's consistent. So between now and 71, we should be able to secure iron ships, steamship of the line, and that will open up other options. We can then start looking at gun turrets and things like that. So the Navy is about to begin, in the Ottoman Empire at least anyway, a period of revolutionary transformation. The thing with the Navy is, unlike the Army, you don't have a light cruiser or frigate from the kind of, a sort of traditional age of sail frigate. That's not going to upgrade into like a modern iron or steel frigate. It's not going to happen. So incidentally, the Navy is 3 days away from setting off Massawa. The reason we've moved the Navy is because we want to provide gunfire support for our marine landing. We are now conscious of the fact that these rebels have got a bit of fight in them. We tend to soften them up using the Navy. This force does not include the ironclads because the ironclads are very slow brown water kind of craft. It will take them a long time to get to the Red Sea. So the ironclads are comfortably sat at home in Constantinople. But yeah, so we're gonna open up 2 branches. With the Navy, ships don't transform into something they're not. You simply have to build them from scratch, and it becomes very quickly very expensive. Not just in terms of the amount of money it costs, but actually also a lot of private wealth, because you have to import the steel, the iron, the huge amounts of industrial materials that go into making these things. This is especially true with larger iron, and then once we go into kind of steel ships, these are very expensive things. They consume coal to use as well, like a fuel, so we have to be mindful of that. So we want to try and begin to stockpile a lot of state money, maybe get back up to 500, 1,000, something like that, and get an area of kind of comfort, and then we can start opening up kind of multiple investment branches once again. We'll keep breech loaders open for the time being. We've just completed kind of a mining technology. Professionalism is going to be the last army technology, I think, probably for the next 10 years, that we're going to directly fund out of the state exchequer. There are other army technologies anyway that will get reserve formations, for example, at 70% there. Next couple of years, that'll become available even without state funding. But what we'll start doing is directly funding 2 branches from the Navy. We'll always maintain 1 branch open for artillery forces, at least until we're up to date. And then once we have enough state revenue and we're generating what we want, we'll open up a 5th branch, and we'll always maintain 1 branch of research directly funded from the state exchequer, focused towards the economy, probably with a focus towards heavy engineering, and things that, not really theoretical developments, but things that have immediate application that could provide us with some kind of immediate economic advantage. So that's the kind of plan. To that end, what we want to try and do is to tip a little bit more of this private capital into the state purse. And one of the ways we do that is through taxation. We've had a very kind of low tax economy for the most part, because we've been very sensitive with regard to upsetting anyone. Different kinds of taxes upset different people. For the most part, early on in history, most of the tax comes from the wealthy. In early industrial kind of society, it's only in the modern era really the poorest pay most of the tax and the wealthy kind of bank offshore. I guess this is the case everywhere, but it's sort of during this era, wealth during this era, like our own era, is very highly concentrated anyway. It's only a very small group of people that control most of the kind of wealth, and they pay most of the tax for the most part. So you have to be really careful. It means that if you massively ramp up tax, you're kind of upsetting really your allies. You're upsetting the people that you're kind of meant to represent, really, your kind of constituency, which are the wealthy, the sort of powerful in society, this kind of thing. So we've been very, very careful. We still have relatively low levels of corporate tax. 15% is the limit. We've got it set to 6%. It was at 4% previously. Census tax, we're going to leave. Census tax is the broad tax across the population. It can max at 8%. We've set it to 2%, so we keep that very, very low. We've upped excise tax from 24% to 26%. So excise tax is really the proportion of luxury goods that we sell. So again, you put that too high, because luxury goods you're really mostly going to sell to the wealthy, So the taxes have been focused on the kind of wealthier part of the population, but that's okay for the time being. At the moment, we have levels of militancy in inner city areas, but they have no means of expressing themselves, so it's no real concern for the time being. Tariff taxes is the only tax that we have fairly high, set at 40%, which is above 50% of what we can set it, because the limit is 70%. We can, if theoretically, tax 70%. That would be really bad for foreign relations if we did that. We're going to keep that at 40%. That minimizes the kind of it basically insulates our economy. We're kind of doing what the United States did. The United States in the modern era represents itself as a kind of bastion of free trade and enterprise, but the reality is the industrialization of the United States, the basis for that was insulating the economy from foreign competition through aggressive taxation. It did this actually right up into the 20s, so and Germany also did this. The industrialization of Germany was also based on very, very clever kind of taxation to kind of to stimulate kind of domestic growth, and we've done exactly that also. We don't just want to get access to resources, we want those resources to be produced in the Ottoman Empire. We don't want to import loads of manufactured goods or anything like that. It's paid dividends. It's really, really worked long term. We're going to keep it set to 40% for the duration. Probably once the economy gets to a certain kind of size, we'll relax it a little bit because it doesn't matter so much, and that will improve. It will be balanced positive for us to do that. We could reduce it by 5%. That gives us a nice boost in terms of foreign relations. I think that is pretty much it for the time being. So small tax adjustments. The economy is looking really good. The Italian war's over. Japan enters the stage of history. This tile is still blurry. Taurus. Yeah, I don't know why. And railroads across the empire. Probably by the next video we'll have railroads, maybe not quite, but maybe we'll have railroads linking the Indian Ocean to our Balkan provinces as far north as, in fact, even further north than Sarajevo. It would be as far north as Bihać. This is quite nice to see our rail line actually connecting up into kind of Zagreb, our sort of protectorate really, and then Marburg and Vienna. So you can now get a train from Vienna. I mean, you could get a train now actually from pretty much anywhere in Europe, any capital in Europe, and you could travel if you wanted by rail. Well, to Sana anyway, in the Arabian Peninsula, but very soon you'd be able to kind of Aden itself. I think I'll leave it there. The next update then will be what is it? Late January now. Probably March, April, May, something like that, I guess, unless something kind of significant happens in the meantime. So thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.